Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're focusing on a really tough situation, the crisis in Sudan.
And specifically the diplomatic side of it, which has just been, well, a series of failures.
Exactly. We're zeroing in on a recent U.S.-backed peace proposal, a high-stakes plan that, in the end, neither of the warring factions would accept.
That's the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF.
So our mission today is to get past the headlines about the fighting. We want to understand, what was actually in this diplomatic text.
Why did it fail so spectacularly?
Right. And then look at the sort of calculated moves one side made to try and get around the complete stalemate.
And we really have to set the stage here because the scale of this conflict is it's devastating.
Yeah.
It erupted back in April 2023, and the consequences have been catastrophic. We're seeing famine conditions accelerating, systematic ethnic killings.
Especially in places like Darfur.
Absolutely. The whole country is at risk. I mean, we could be looking at a second national division in Sudan's history. It's an existential crisis.
The stakes just couldn't be higher. Now, the sources you shared with us give us a key window into this. The main voice here is Masad Boulos.
Right, who advised former President Trump on Africa and the Arab world.
And he confirmed the U.S. delivered what he called a strong text, a peace plan, directly to the two generals.
To General Al-Burhan of the Army and General Dagalo or Hemedti of the RSF.
And the outcome. Neither side officially signed on.
And it's so important to understand who the RSF are. I mean, they aren't just another army.
No.
This is a paramilitary group that grew out of the Janjaweed militias. They're notorious, especially for what they did in Darfur.
So their goal is political legitimacy.
Exactly. Well, the army's goal is to remain the sole established military power of the state. So any peace plan, any plan, has to figure out how to integrate this paramilitary force.
And that's the fault line. That's where everything breaks down.
It is the absolute fault line.
And this is where you see the tragedy of this kind of external diplomacy. Boulos mentioned that both sides initially welcomed the plan.
Welcomed the idea of it, the gesture.
The gesture, right.
Yeah.
But when it came to the actual text, the final document, neither would agree. It's one thing to be polite to the U.S., it's another to actually sign away your power.
And this rejection didn't just happen in a vacuum. This wasn't the first attempt.
No, not at all.
This U.S. effort came after months of totally stalled negotiations. There were these larger efforts led by a whole group, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE.
Some real regional heavyweights in there.
And they failed. Repeatedly. They put a joint proposal on the table back in November, and it just stalled completely.
Let's just pause on that for a second, that previous failure. What was in that earlier proposal that made it a non-starter?
Well, that November plan was very granular. It was heavily focused on a structured military integration.
So the nuts and bolts of how the RSF would be absorbed.
Exactly. And a detailed roadmap for power sharing. These are the 2 points that Burhan and Hemedti know would weaken their personal control. So its failure really signaled that even with all that regional muscle, external mediation couldn't fix the zero-sum game between these two generals.
So the U.S. sees that and then moves forward with this new plan, hoping to break that specific deadlock.
But it just became the new battlefield for the same old fight.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If they already knew the comprehensive roadmap wouldn't work, why did this new U.S. text hit such a hard wall? Let's start with General Burhan's reaction, because it was explosive.
It really was.
Speaking for the Army, he called the U.S. proposal the worst he'd ever seen. That is just an incredibly strong rejection.
It suggests he saw it as fundamentally biased against him.
Or against his institution, yeah. And his reasoning is really the key here. He argued the plan, quote, marginalizes the Army and grants the Rapid Support Forces legitimacy.
And there's that word again. Legitimacy.
It's everything.
For the Sudanese army, which sees itself as the only legitimate defender of the state, giving the RSF a recognized role, it's an existential threat. It's saying this force, descended from the Janjaweed, gets a seat at the table.
So if the Army feels that marginalized, what was Washington's response to this, this flat-out rejection?
Well, according to Boulos, the Army didn't just say no. They came back with new preconditions.
Classic negotiation tactic.
Totally. Reject the main text, try to start a new conversation on your own terms. But Washington's response was firm.
What'd they say?
The plan has to be adopted in its original formula. Period. No changes.
Wow. That insistence on the original formula. That's fascinating. Is Washington just calling his bluff? Or are they trying to stay neutral by not accepting changes from anyone?
It's a leverage play, for sure. Boulos even went further and criticized Burhan publicly. He said his criticisms were based on false facts.
So they're directly contradicting him.
They are. The implication is, the U.S. thinks the text is balanced and that Burhan is just making excuses because what he really wants is to wipe the RSF off the map entirely.
So by sticking to the original text, the U.S. is trying to force his hand. Either engage with the deal as is, or risk being seen as the one blocking piece.
That's the pressure they're trying to apply.
Okay, so that's the Army's position. A hard stop, new preconditions. But if Burhan's move was this big confrontational rejection, how did Hemeti play it?
His move was much more subtle, much more about the optics.
Hemeti, leading the RSF, he didn't give a hard no. Instead, on a Monday, he declares a unilateral ceasefire immediately.
Which sounds great, right? It's dramatic, it seems positive.
But it's totally outside the framework of the U.S. plan. He's basically performing a concession for the world to see.
That word performing is critical because by the next day, sources were saying it was totally unclear if the ceasefire was even holding on the ground.
So a huge question mark over whether it was a real commitment or just a PR move.
A very low-cost move that gets you immediate diplomatic goodwill.
And even with all that uncertainty, the U.S. seemed to welcome it. Boulos said he hoped the RSF would adhere to it.
I mean, it just shows how desperate the diplomatic community is for any good news, any sign of de-escalation, no matter how flimsy it might be.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Hemeti's move seems like a calculated attempt to go around the stalemate.
It's a way to isolate the army. He also rejected the text, just like Burhan, but by then declaring the ceasefire, he positions the RSF as the reasonable party.
He's the one responding to the international calls for humanitarian access.
Exactly. He's trying to make the army look like the sole obstacle.
So it's a move designed to bypass a formal signed agreement. And it keeps all the pressure on Burhan's side of the court, right? Hemeti is essentially saying, we've paused the fighting. What are you doing?
Precisely. It really suggests that, at least for this moment, Hemeti is maybe more concerned about his international reputation, about sanctions, than he is about maintaining military pressure on the ground.
Especially if it helps him get that political legitimacy that Burhan is so dead set on denying him.
That's the game he's playing.
But this whole political chess game is happening while people are suffering. I mean, the human cost is just terrible.
That's horrifying.
When you strip away all of it, the preconditions, the false facts, the questionable ceasefires, what do people on the ground need right now?
The immediate needs are they're stark. Forget the U.S. text for a moment. What both sides absolutely have to accept is the creation of humanitarian corridors.
Safe paths for aid.
Safe, guaranteed paths. They have to stop the fighting or at least create secure zones so aid can get in and the famine doesn't become even worse. That has to come before any long-term political solution.
And we have to keep circling back to the ultimate goal here, no matter how distant it feels.
The transition to a civil state.
Right. A credible transition period, lasting peace. That's the only real light at the end of this very, very dark tunnel.
This just raises such an important question, though. The whole idea of a civil state depends entirely on these two warring factions.
Two heavily armed factions.
And both of them just rejected a comprehensive U.S.-backed plan because it threatened their power. It just highlights the depth of the challenge here. This isn't just about writing a constitution.
No.
It's about convincing two generals to effectively commit institutional suicide. And until their own political calculus changes, I just don't see how any external plan, no matter how strong the text is, can actually make peace stick.
So let's just do a quick recap of what we found here. The U.S. puts a plan on the table to break the deadlock.
Both sides engage, but then both sides reject the text.
The Army, under Burhan, gives this really venomous rejection, calls it the worst, claims it legitimizes the RSF.
And then the U.S. is forced to publicly say his claims are based on false facts. A really ugly public spat.
Meanwhile, the RSF and Dagalo try this clever counterplay.
A unilateral ceasefire that may or may not be real. It's a tactical move, to avoid a formal rejection while still looking like the good guy to the international community.
So the end result is a complete diplomatic standstill. We're right back where we were after the last multinational efforts failed.
Exactly.
And that really brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to consider. We saw the big multinational efforts, U.S., Saudi, Egypt, UAE, all fail because the generals' lust for power was just too strong.
Right. And now this new single-country effort from the U.S. has also ended in a public stalemate over this fundamental issue of legitimacy.
So what does this pattern of failure tell you about the future of external diplomacy here? Is there any hope for it?
Or do we just have to wait until things get so bad on the ground, until the famine and the ethnic killing reach some kind of critical mass, that it finally forces the generals to accept a peace that means they lose power?
Or is the real key something else? Is it the balance of their regional backers, like the UAE or Egypt, that could actually leverage some kind of internal change?
A really complex and frankly deeply troubling set of questions.
It is. Thank you for sharing these sources and for taking this critical deep dive with us into the diplomatic stalemate in Sudan. We'll see you next time.